Okay, so the next question is, if an agency uses eBuy, must it ever prepare a justification, such as if the agency receives fewer than 3 bids, or quotes as we call them in the schedules world? The answer to that is no. If you post your RFQ on eBuy, then you're basically satisfying the competition requirements, because what you're ensuring is that all the schedule contractors that were awarded your schedule and the SIN or SINs that covers your requirement can see your RFQ. So if you post it on eBuy and there's 300 eligible small businesses that can do it, and you get only 2 back, well, you still fulfilled the competition requirements, so you're fine. So that's why we've been recommending to all of our ordering activities that if you post your RFQ to eBuy, it will save you a lot of headache. Because you may think sending an RFQ to 20 vendors will ensure you get 3 back, but that's not always the case. So you don't want to have to do that additional documentation when you only get 2 back. So might as well just post it to eBuy, and then if you get 2 back, you're fine, because you still complied with the competition requirements. Next question is, if an agency decides to limit consideration to fewer than all small businesses, and this is basically where the agency decides not to post their RFQ on eBuy, and the agency thinks that it will receive at least 3 offers but receives only 2 or 1, what must it do? And this kind of reiterates what the last question was. Because the agency did not post on eBuy and they didn't get 3 quotes back, the CO then has to prepare a written determination that no other contractors were capable of fulfilling their requirement, despite reasonable efforts to identify more small business contractors, or contractors in general. And the determination also has to explain efforts that were made to obtain quotes from at least 3 scheduled contractors. Of course, this requirement only applies on orders and BPAs exceeding the SAT. If it's below, it's slightly different competition requirements. Okay, next question. If an agency can only find 2 small businesses, can it still do a set-aside? Alright, this one gets a little bit tricky. Yes, you can still do a set-aside. However, the agency's got to document the circumstances for restricting consideration to fewer than 3. And there are 4 circumstances under which you can limit sources under schedules. And those instances are found in 8.45-6. And they're not, if you've been doing government contracting long enough, you know what they are. One of them is urgent and compelling. The second one is it's a logical follow-on to an existing procurement that's about to die. 3, that only one source is capable of doing the work. And the 4th is it's a brand name item. So in those instances, you can limit your sources to less than 3, but you do have to justify it in a document. Now, for actions above the SAT, the requirement to distribute the RFQ to sufficient number of schedule holders to get 3 back is mandated by Section 863. That's the statute that changed the ordering procedures under 8.4 back in May. And one thing to note is that Section 1331 of the Jobs Act, the set-aside section, does not provide relief from this competition requirement. Okay, so next question is, can you set aside orders against small business set-aside SINs and or set-aside schedules? One thing I forgot to note earlier, while we have some small business set-aside SINs, we have one schedule that is completely set aside for small business, and that's our TAP schedule. That's the Temporary Administrative and Professional Staffing Services. So this question, to boil it down, is basically asking, can you set aside orders, can you do a set aside against a set aside? In this case, yes, you can do a set aside, but only if it's for a specific small business socioeconomic category. So you can't just do a small business set-aside under one of these set-aside SINs or the schedule. Now, if you wanted to do a hub zone set-aside, against these small business set-aside SINs in the tab schedule, that's fine. Always keep in mind, though, market research has to indicate that there are enough eligible small business concerns capable of performing the work. Before I go into the next question, can I ask real quick again for people to mute their phone lines? We are recording this, and it would make it a lot easier to hear if we didn't have the background noise. Okay. The next question is, what is meant by the specific small business program eligibility requirements? What that refers to is that some of the small business programs identified in Part 19 have conditions under which you can set aside an acquisition. And the easiest example to provide is that for an order to be set aside under the Women-Owned Small Business Program or the Economically Disadvantaged Women-Owned Small Business Program, the requirement needs to be under $6.5 million if it's a manufacturing requirement, or $4 million if it's a non-manufacturing requirement. In addition to these dollar thresholds, your requirement also has to fall within the scope of specific NAICS codes industries, which the SBA has determined that women-owned small business concerns are underrepresented or substantially underrepresented. So that's just one example of what that language means, that you can't just set aside any order for under the Women-Owned Small Business Program. It has to meet the criteria that's in Part 19.